Everything changed the moment this quietly broke into public view, yet almost no one is explaining what it actually means. A single diplomatic development has shifted the entire direction of the Iran nuclear issue, and beneath the surface, a far deeper geopolitical struggle is unfolding in real time. Early this morning, reports confirmed that Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, arrived in St. Petersburg for an urgent and high-level meeting with Vladimir Putin. On the surface, it looks like routine diplomacy, but the timing tells a different story. Within hours, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov made a statement that immediately raised the stakes. Russia's offer to take custody of Iran's enriched uranium is still active. Not a rumor, not a draft proposal, but an ongoing official option that remains on the table. And then came the detail that changes everything. It has not been acted upon. Those 4 words reveal a stalled decision at the center of one of the world's most sensitive nuclear disputes. Because what is unfolding here is not just another round of talks. It is a confrontation over the only mechanism that could potentially prevent escalation, and yet it remains unused. For months, the United States has maintained one central demand across every diplomatic channel, whether public negotiations or private backdoor discussions. Iran must remove its enriched uranium from its territory. Not reduce it, not freeze it, but eliminate it from domestic control entirely. The material in question is highly significant, around 450 kilograms enriched to 60%, a level dangerously close to weapons-grade capability. In practical terms, this stockpile could be further refined into material sufficient for multiple nuclear weapons within weeks if a political decision were made. This is not just one item among many in negotiations. It is the core issue. Every ceasefire discussion, every indirect negotiation, every diplomatic message eventually returns to this single condition. It is the bottleneck that determines whether tensions ease or escalate further. Now, into this already fragile situation, Russia has stepped forward with what appears, at least on paper, to be a complete solution. Moscow has proposed taking custody of Iran's enriched uranium, transferring it out of Iranian territory, storing it securely within Russia, and processing it under international oversight. In this framework, Iran would retain its nuclear infrastructure, but the most sensitive material would be physically removed from its control. In theory, this arrangement addresses every major concern at once. The United States' demand is met because the uranium leaves Iran. Iran maintains its program under civilian oversight. International bodies like the International Atomic Energy Agency could monitor the entire process. Even the risk of immediate escalation would be significantly reduced. It is, in many ways, the kind of diplomatic off-ramp that would normally be considered a breakthrough. Yet despite this, the proposal has not moved forward. And that is where the real tension begins to emerge. Because if a solution exists that could potentially reduce the risk of conflict, satisfy the central security demand, and stabilize a volatile region, the obvious question becomes unavoidable. Why has it been rejected or left untouched? The answer is not simple, and it does not lie only in uranium. It lies in competing strategic interests, in mistrust between global powers, and in the deeper structure of geopolitical rivalry that surrounds this entire issue. As this proposal sits unresolved, Abbas Araghchi's arrival in Russia takes on a much sharper meaning. This is not a routine diplomatic stop. It is a direct engagement with the only country currently offering a working mechanism to resolve the core problem. And in doing so, it signals something important. Iran is not waiting passively for Washington's approval. It is actively exploring alternative pathways. To understand why this moment carries so much weight, it is necessary to recognize that this is not a new arrangement being invented from scratch. It is, in fact, a return to a system that previously existed and functioned. Under the earlier nuclear agreement, Iran did ship out the vast majority of its enriched uranium stockpile, and the destination was Russia. That material was handled, stored, and processed under international supervision, with verification from the International Atomic Energy Agency confirming compliance over several years. The system worked as designed until the agreement collapsed after the United States withdrew in 2018. Now, that same framework is being discussed again, almost in identical form, and Russia is once again positioned as the central actor capable of executing it. But despite its technical feasibility and historical precedent, the plan remains stalled. The reason this matters so much is because the Russian proposal is not theoretical or experimental. It is based on a system that has already functioned in the real world. During the years when the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was active, Iran did not simply limit its nuclear activity on paper. It physically transferred most of its enriched uranium out of the country. Around 97% of its stockpile was shipped abroad, and Russia played a central role in that process. The material was handled by Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear corporation, stored under controlled conditions, and monitored through international oversight mechanisms involving the International Atomic Energy Agency. The entire arrangement was not just symbolic diplomacy. It was a functioning operational system that achieved its technical goals. For a period of time, it worked as intended. Independent verification confirmed that Iran complied with the agreed limits, and there were no reported diversions or breakdowns in supervision. In practical terms, it was one of the few moments where the nuclear issue was managed through structured containment rather than crisis escalation. That history is important because when Russian officials today refer to their positive experience handling Iran's uranium, they are not presenting a political argument. They are pointing to a documented precedent. Dmitry Peskov's recent statement reflects this exact framing. Russia is not offering a speculative idea. It is presenting a model that has already been tested, already implemented, and already verified. From Moscow's perspective, this is not a new negotiation concept. It is a repeatable process. Technically, the mechanism still exists. Russia has the infrastructure, the storage capacity, the regulatory systems, and the institutional relationship with the IAEA required to carry out such a transfer again. Even nuclear industry experts have noted that the logistical pathways for secure transport and monitoring were never dismantled. In theory, the system could be reactivated with relatively limited setup time. Diplomatically, too, the structure is familiar. The coordination channels between Iran, Russia, and international inspectors were established over years of previous implementation. That means much of the framework does not need to be invented again. It simply needs to be reactivated and adjusted. And yet, despite all of this, the proposal remains frozen. This is where the political layer becomes impossible to ignore. The United States agrees with the core objective. There is broad alignment on one point. Iran should not retain a large stockpile of highly enriched uranium on its territory. That part of the equation is not in dispute. The disagreement is not about whether the material should be removed, but about how and through whom that removal should happen. Washington's position, based on reporting and diplomatic signals, is that Russia cannot be the custodian of this process. The concern is not only technical, but strategic. Allowing Russia to take custody of Iranian uranium would expand Moscow's influence in the global nuclear fuel cycle at a time when the United States and its allies are actively trying to reduce dependence on Russian nuclear services. This is where the issue stops being purely about nuclear security and becomes part of a broader power competition. Russia, through Rosatom, already holds a significant share of the global nuclear fuel market. It supplies enrichment services, reactor technology, and fuel cycle support to multiple countries. If it were to take custody of Iran's stockpile and integrate it into its processing chain, that influence would grow further. From Washington's perspective, that shift is not neutral. It is a strategic disadvantage. It strengthens a geopolitical competitor in a critical energy sector that is tightly linked to national security. However, this creates a difficult contradiction, because while the United States rejects the Russian mechanism, it has not presented an equally viable alternative that is both politically acceptable to Iran and operationally realistic. Other theoretical options exist on paper, but they face serious limitations. Direct transfer of uranium to the United States is politically impossible, given the current state of relations. European or allied custodians face similar trust and credibility issues from Tehran's perspective. Even proposals involving destruction or neutralization inside Iran would require a level of cooperation and transparency that does not currently exist. So the situation becomes structurally stuck. The United States wants the uranium removed. Russia offers a proven method to remove it. Iran is willing to engage in discussion through that channel. But the solution is rejected because of who controls it, not because of what it achieves. That is the core tension sitting beneath the surface of this entire dispute. And it is exactly why Arakchi's presence in St. Petersburg is not symbolic. It is operational. It signals that Iran is actively engaging the only available mechanism that has both technical credibility and historical precedent, even as that mechanism remains politically contested at the highest level. As this diplomatic deadlock continues, the situation on the ground is quietly shifting in ways that make the timing of Arakchi's visit even more significant. While Washington hesitates over the Russian proposal, Iran is not standing still. Instead, it is moving directly toward Moscow, reinforcing a channel that already exists and has already been tested. The arrival of Iran's foreign minister in St. Petersburg is not just another meeting on the diplomatic calendar. It is a deliberate signal that Tehran understands the structure of the current impasse. If the United States will not accept Russia as the intermediary for resolving the uranium issue, then Iran will deepen its coordination with Russia directly. This is not symbolic positioning, it is strategic adaptation. At the same time, Russia's message remains unchanged. Dmitry Peskov has confirmed again that the proposal is still active, still available, and still technically viable. Nothing in the offer has been withdrawn or downgraded. From Moscow's perspective, the framework remains ready for immediate implementation if political approval aligns. This creates a rare and unusual situation in international diplomacy. The technical solution exists, the operational capacity exists, the verification structure exists, even historical precedent exists. What is missing is not capability, but agreement among the key political actors on who should control the process. To understand why this matters, it is important to return to the origin of the current nuclear framework. Under the original Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the system depended heavily on multilateral coordination. Iran agreed to significantly reduce its enriched uranium stockpile, and the material was physically removed from its territory. Russia played a central role in receiving and processing that uranium under international supervision. That arrangement was not improvised. It was carefully constructed over years of negotiation. It also included oversight by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which verified compliance and tracked material flow. For a time, the system achieved its primary objective, reducing immediate nuclear risk while maintaining diplomatic stability. The collapse of that agreement in 2018 did not erase the infrastructure. It disrupted the political framework, but many of the technical mechanisms remained intact. Storage protocols, transport channels, and monitoring systems were all designed with continuity in mind. That is one reason Russia can still describe its current proposal as operational rather than theoretical. From a technical standpoint, restarting such a system is not impossible. It would require coordination, inspection agreements, and updated safeguards, but the core architecture is still familiar to all parties involved. This is why Russian officials emphasize experience. They are not describing an abstract idea. They are referring to a process that was already executed successfully, with international verification confirming compliance over multiple years. But the political environment surrounding this proposal has changed dramatically since then. Today, the United States views Russia not as a neutral technical partner, but as a strategic competitor. This shifts the interpretation of any Russian involvement in sensitive nuclear material. What was once seen as functional cooperation is now viewed through the lens of geopolitical advantage. Washington's concern is not limited to the immediate transfer of uranium. It extends to what happens afterward. If Russia takes custody of Iran's enriched material, it does not simply store it, it integrates it into its nuclear fuel ecosystem, which is already one of the largest in the world. Rosatom's global reach spans multiple continents, supplying reactor, fuel, and nuclear services to a wide network of countries. From a strategic standpoint, this means that accepting the Russian proposal would indirectly strengthen Russia's position in a sector that has long-term implications for global energy dependence and geopolitical leverage. That is the underlying tension. The United States supports the goal of removing enriched uranium from Iran, but rejects the pathway that achieves it most efficiently based on prior experience. Russia offers continuity with a system that already worked. Washington sees that same system as a potential expansion of Russian influence. Meanwhile, Iran is operating within a very different calculation. For Tehran, the priority is not the identity of the custodian, but the preservation of its nuclear infrastructure, while reducing immediate external pressure. The Russian channel offers a practical route to de-escalation without dismantling its domestic program entirely. This is why Araghchi's presence in Russia carries more weight than a routine diplomatic visit. It reflects a growing alignment of convenience between Tehran and Moscow at a moment when other channels are stalled. And as this alignment becomes more visible, the diplomatic gap between Washington's objectives and the available mechanisms to achieve them continues to widen. As this diplomatic gap widens, the situation becomes more complicated than a simple disagreement over policy. It starts to look like a structural imbalance, where every major actor is operating from a different set of priorities, yet all are tied to the same unresolved problem. On one side, the United States maintains a clear objective. Iran's enriched uranium must be removed from its territory. That position has remained consistent across administrations, negotiations, and public statements. The concern is rooted in preventing any rapid pathway toward weapons capability and reducing long-term nuclear risk in the region. On the other side, Russia is offering a mechanism that directly addresses that concern. The proposal is straightforward in design. Transfer the enriched uranium out of Iran, store it under Russian control, and process it within a system already familiar to international inspectors. From a technical standpoint, it is a continuation of a process that has already been implemented in the past. Iran sits in the middle of these two positions, but with its own set of priorities. For Tehran, the key issue is not only the removal of uranium from internal circulation, but also the preservation of its nuclear infrastructure and national autonomy. Any solution that achieves removal without dismantling its program is more acceptable than one that requires full internal rollback or external domination. This is why the Russian proposal becomes attractive from Iran's perspective. It resolves the immediate pressure without forcing a complete structural surrender of its nuclear capabilities. In practical terms, it allows Iran to retain its technological base while complying with the central demand of uranium removal. However, the United States does not evaluate the proposal purely on technical efficiency. The concern extends into the geopolitical consequences of allowing Russia to become the central custodian of such sensitive material. Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear agency, is already a dominant player in global nuclear services. It supplies fuel, builds reactors, and provides long-term nuclear infrastructure support to multiple countries. If Russia were to take custody of Iran's enriched uranium and integrate it into its processing chain, it would not just be a storage arrangement. It would reinforce Russia's position as a central hub in the global nuclear fuel cycle. From Washington's perspective, that is not a neutral outcome. It strengthens a geopolitical competitor in a sector that directly intersects with energy security, technological dependency, and long-term strategic influence. That is where the rejection comes from. Not from disagreement over the end goal, but from concern over who gains control of the process itself. This creates a paradox that defines the current moment. The most efficient technical solution is also the most politically sensitive one. The most historically proven mechanism is also the one viewed as strategically disadvantageous. While this debate continues, Iran is actively engaging the only pathway that remains operational. Arakchi's meeting in St. Petersburg is not an isolated diplomatic gesture. It is part of a broader pattern of coordination that reflects where the momentum is currently moving. Russia's position, as confirmed by its spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, remains unchanged. The offer is still available. It has not been withdrawn, modified, or downgraded. From Moscow's perspective, the structure is ready to be activated whenever political alignment allows. This is important because it means the obstacle is not technical feasibility. It is not logistical capacity. It is not even verification capability. All of those elements already exist in some form. The obstacle is political agreement on control and trust. And trust, in this context, is not evenly distributed. The United States does not trust Russia with expanded influence in nuclear material handling. Iran does not fully trust Western actors with custody of its strategic assets. Russia positions itself as the only actor with both historical experience and operational readiness to bridge that gap. That is why this issue remains unresolved despite multiple rounds of discussions over the years. At the same time, the absence of progress has consequences that extend beyond diplomacy. The longer the uranium issue remains unresolved, the more it influences global energy markets, regional security calculations, and military posturing in surrounding areas. Instability does not remain confined to negotiation rooms. It spreads outward into shipping routes, oil pricing, and broader strategic planning across multiple regions. This is why Araghchi's presence in Russia cannot be separated from the wider geopolitical environment. It is happening at a moment when every delay has measurable external effects, and every rejected proposal reshapes expectations about what comes next. And beneath all of this, one simple fact remains unchanged. The only functioning model that has ever successfully managed Iran's enriched uranium outside its borders is the one that is currently being discussed again in St. Petersburg. As the talks continue to unfold in St. Petersburg, the situation becomes even more difficult to separate from broader global power dynamics. What appears on the surface as a technical discussion about uranium custody is, in reality, deeply tied to long-term strategic positioning between major global actors. Russia's role in this framework is not new. It is built on years of involvement in Iran's nuclear arrangements, particularly during the period when the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was still active. During that time, Russia was not a bystander. It was a central operational partner, receiving and managing the bulk of Iran's enriched uranium under internationally monitored conditions. That experience matters now because it gives Moscow a unique claim, continuity. Unlike other potential custodians, Russia can point to a functioning historical model where the exact same type of material was transferred, secured, and monitored successfully without major breakdowns. From a purely procedural perspective, that history gives the current proposal credibility. The infrastructure is not theoretical. The institutional memory exists. The coordination channels with the International Atomic Energy Agency are already established from prior implementation. This is why Russian officials describe the offer as more than just diplomacy. In their view, it is a repeatable system that has already been proven in practice. That framing is central to how Moscow positions itself in the current debate. However, the geopolitical environment surrounding that same system has changed significantly since its last implementation. The United States now views Russia through a far more competitive lens, particularly in sectors related to energy and strategic infrastructure. Nuclear fuel processing is not just a technical industry, it is a long-term leverage point. Countries that control enrichment, storage, and fuel supply chains hold influence over entire energy systems across multiple regions. Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear corporation, already operates on a global scale. It is involved in reactor construction, fuel supply, and long-term nuclear partnerships across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. If Russia were to take custody of Iran's enriched uranium and process it within that system, it would reinforce an already significant position in the global nuclear supply network. From Washington's perspective, this is where the concern intensifies. Even if the immediate security objective is achieved, the long-term consequence could be an expansion of Russian influence in a sector that has direct implications for energy independence and strategic autonomy. That is the core tension. The solution addresses the nuclear risk, but potentially shifts the balance of global nuclear infrastructure power. Meanwhile, Iran is navigating this landscape with a different set of calculations. For Tehran, the priority is to reduce immediate external pressure while maintaining the core of its nuclear program. The Russian proposal offers a pathway that achieves both. It removes sensitive material from its territory without forcing a complete dismantling of its domestic nuclear capabilities. This is why engagement with Moscow is intensifying rather than slowing down. Arakchi's presence in St. Petersburg reflects a pragmatic approach. Iran is not waiting for consensus among external powers. It is actively engaging the channel that currently offers the most concrete operational framework. At the same time, the United States remains in a position where it supports the outcome but rejects the mechanism that produces it. This creates a structural delay. The goal is shared, but the pathway is contested. And while that disagreement continues, the actual material at the center of the dispute remains unchanged. Roughly 450 kilograms of highly enriched uranium still located inside Iran. That fact alone ensures that the issue remains central to every negotiation, regardless of how discussions evolve. What makes the current moment more significant is that there is no competing mechanism with the same level of technical readiness. Alternative proposals exist in theory, but they lack either political feasibility, mutual trust, or operational history. This leaves a narrow set of options on the table, most of which circle back to the same unresolved question: who is acceptable as the custodian of Iran's enriched uranium? That question is now shaping not only bilateral relations, but also broader alignments between global powers. Russia's involvement is not isolated. It is connected to its wider strategic relationship with Iran, including a long-term cooperation framework signed earlier this year that extends across economic, military, and political domains.